do you get writer's block or do you get politician's block?
You'll have to define both for me.
Personal question, do you like the Delhi sambar, what we've done to the sambar here in Delhi?
Look,
do you...
you guys have to understand that sambar was invented in the south because of the north. I feel so lucky that I've grown up in so many parts of India. I have friends and classmates in every major city. And I feel at home anywhere in India.
The English language in your prose is when you write, when you speak, which is very fascinating. So when it comes to Malayali... Malayalam, sorry, apologies. Mat karna troll. You know...
Bharadam and the Ketalo, Abhimana Puridam Avanam Kerala and the Ketal, Tilakyanam Chora Namukin.
Welcome everybody on behalf of Red FM Office Outside Story. We are glad to have you for this segment called BookMarked, the literature segment. It's my absolute pleasure and honor to be doing this for Red FM and also to be hosting the esteemed personality over here. I'm a major fangirl. मैं जानती हूँ मैं कैसे अपने आप को बिल्कुल काबू में करके बैठी हूँ यहाँ पे खड़ी हूँ. My nerves, you know, are not getting the better of me today for sure. So when you think of Shashi Tharoor, you might first recall the parliamentarian with the silver tongue, the author whose sentences make you reach for a dictionary, or the diplomat who's navigated world affairs with wit and wisdom. But before all that, there was a little boy in a Malayali household, growing up far from Kerala's backwaters, yet carrying Kerala's values in his heart. The rhythm of Malayali lullabies, the scent of coconut oil on a Sunday morning, the debates at the dinner table, the Onam Sadhya spread on a banana leaf. These were as much a part of his world as the bustling city outside his window. Today, we have the privilege of meeting not just the public figure, but the person who has carried his Nard in his heart wherever he's gone. From Geneva to New York, from the UN corridors to the Lok Sabha floor, let's have a resounding welcome for Dr. Shashi Tharoor amidst us for Morpheus, Southside Stories, literature segment, BookMarked.
Wonderful.
Sir.
Great to see you all and thanks for the enthusiastic welcome.
I had a panoply of words ready to welcome you, but they all seem to have fled away in your presence.
Not to worry. We can smile at each other instead. It'll make for an entertaining evening.
Thank you so much. That something comes easily. I don't need a dictionary for that.
But it won't play very well on Red FM.
My CEO is sitting right in front of me. I'm going to getting my KRAs marked right now, ASAP.
So you'll need words after all.
And also, Dr. Tharoor, before we dive into literature and its grand ideas, we also have to talk about your recent book, Living Constitution, published by Aleph Book Company. But before all of that, we'd like to start with something closer to home. You know, the Malayali child who grew up to be this global citizen, you know, that you are, the reason you are here, the reason we are doing a BookMarked. So you grew up in the cosmopolitan city of Mumbai in a quintessentially Malayali household. How did this unique cultural blend shape your identity, both personally and as a writer?
Okay, partly grew up in Mumbai, partly went to high school in Calcutta, partly went to college in Delhi. So I'm a pan-Indian child, which is not entirely uncommon. The Malayalis are notoriously diasporic people. They tend to go off and migrate to other... You want me to stand up? I guess I should. Yeah, okay, thank you. You can see me. I just realized it was going to be difficult otherwise for any of you to see me, to hear this disembodied voice coming your way. Anyway, so yeah, I mean, I grew up all over India, but of course, my parents were very, very connected. They're both born in villages in Kerala. They're both first-generation urbanites. My dad was dragged off by an elder brother to London at the age of 19. So that's how suddenly he went from a Kerala village to the big metropolitan city in the western end of Europe. That's where he improved his English, and I suppose I was born there, so I picked up some of those sounds as well. And then we moved back to India when I was about 2.5. So about 2.5 to 12.5 in Mumbai, or Bombay as it was, and then the next 3 years of high school in Calcutta, and then 3 years of college in Delhi. So my youth, my childhood was growing up everywhere else. But home was always very much anchored to Kerala. We had Kerala food at home. Occasionally other dishes crept in inevitably, but basically it was Kerala food at home. My parents spoke Malayalam to each other. My mother still preferred to speak Malayalam to us, my sisters and I. So we had some of the language. And every year, unfailingly, they would drag us off to Kerala, to their villages on the annual vacations. And, you know, we as kids after a while started saying, this is strictly for the birds, this annual migration south, you know. Birds fly south for the winter. Why are we going there in the summer? But anyway, for them, that was their way of ensuring we stayed connected to our roots. And today, my sisters and I are so grateful for that, because my mother's ancestral home, which is 250 years old in a village in Palakkad, in Kerala, surrounded by paddy fields and coconut trees and all that, I mean, right out of a picture postcard. And that is something that means something to my sisters and me in ways that are absolutely vital for us. The question you were asking, I've already lost track of, my dear Swati.
So how did you shape your identity both
How did it
personally
shape my
and a
identity?
writer?
I was made very conscious of two things simultaneously. First, that we were Malayali, that the family was anchored and rooted in one place, but also that we were Indian. The very pan-Indian nature of our lives, the completely pan-Indian nature of our friendships, and my parents' own lives meant that we saw ourselves as both Indian and Malayali simultaneously. And frankly, there's no real contradiction in that. It also becomes easier when you're part of a diaspora. So in fact, most of my parents' friends were of very different backgrounds ethnically and so on, people my dad knew through work, that kind of thing. But at the same time, they had a strong Malayali circle as well. And part of growing up was visiting Malayali Christian friends on Christmas and Malayali Muslim friends on Eid. I mean, these things were just part of what was built into their normal lives. And we grew up with that awareness. So yes, it did shape my sense of both Malayaliness and Indianness.
Your books span history, politics, culture, and fiction. Now, how do you decide whether an idea becomes a novel, a historical account, or a political commentary?
What circumstances have driven that a lot? Because I started off enjoying reading and writing fiction, and 4 of my first 5 books were novels. 3 novels and a collection of short stories, were all fiction. Now, the thing about that is that that was, for me, a more pleasurable way of dealing with issues I cared about, which were always history, politics, culture, what shaped India. These are things I had been sort of thinking about for a very long time, and those were things that came out in my writing. But I used fiction as a means of telling it. I would often joke that there used to be a beer commercial when I was a graduate student in America that talked about a beer that reached parts that other beers don't reach. And I said I write fiction because those are the books that reach parts that other books don't reach, because non-fiction basically aims at the level of your mind, right? It tells you something, it argues something, it convinces you in some way, whereas fiction tries to touch your sentiments, your emotions, your heart, your soul. And therefore, it's a different way of getting your message across to the reader. So I was very enamored of fiction, but as my career grew, because I was always a part-time writer, and in those days a full-time UN official, now a full-time politician, I found that it became impossible for me to do justice to fiction writing, because fiction requires not just time, which is scarce enough when you're squeezing it out of a day at night and so on, but also it requires a space inside your head. And that space is so indispensable to be able to create an alternative universe, to populate it with people, characters, episodes, dialogue that are as real to you as anything you're encountering in your daily life. And you need to sort of build a sort of glass palace of illusion and step into it every day to keep that illusion alive, or you can't sustain the fiction. Now, when you're doing the kind of work I was doing, I was fortunately in very challenging and exciting responsibilities of the UN. It was impossible to predict when I'd be interrupted, when I'd be dragged off to deal with some global crisis, whatever it was, when I'd be having to travel. And then, each time the fiction writing was interrupted, there'd be a crack emerging in the glass palace. And after there were enough cracks, the entire glass would shatter and fall, and that would be the end of it. In the first decade of this century, my laptop was littered with at least 3 half-begun novels that I could not continue. And some of them weren't too bad. I often think that maybe I should go back to my abandoned manuscripts one day in political retirement. Once the voters decide to return me to the world of literature, I might go back to fiction. But in the meantime, non-fiction is what I write, because non-fiction is interruptible. If I'm writing something, I know what I'm trying to say to you, right? Even if I interrupt it for 6 weeks, 7 weeks, go campaign an election in your state, come back in 4 weeks' time or 5 weeks' time, you can reread what you've written, pick up the threads and keep going. And that's why of my next 22 books, they've all been non-fiction. I haven't published fiction since 2001 when I published my novel Riot, my last novel. And I do regret that. And I know pretty much every time I publish a book, somebody or the other will write to me saying, when are you going to give us a novel? We're waiting for it, and so on. And I promise you, if there's any amongst you in the audience who want to ask that question, I won't disappoint you. One day, God willing, as long as I'm alive and kicking, you'll get a novel out of me again. I'm not giving up on fiction. I love it. But this is why.
So you don't get a... Yeah, I was just about to say, juice veno, sir. Vellam veno? Juice veno? Juice veno. Am I saying it right?
Juice veno means, do you want juice?
Yeah,
It's already come,
come.
so it's too late to ask. Juice ishtamana.
Late.
Do you like it?
I'll take up on that lessons from you later. But now, talking about the roots that you've just shared with us, sir. Now, were there specific Malayalam writers or family influences that sowed the seeds for your literary and oratory journey?
Well, I mean, Malayalis are readers. I mean, it's just in the blood. And everybody in my family read avidly. My father also was a good personal friend of two great Malayali writers of his generation. One was O.V. Vijayan, who wrote arguably one of the greatest classics of Malayalam fiction, of Indian fiction, I would argue, and of world fiction, because he was writing at the same time as Gabriel Garcia Marquez was writing 100 Years of Solitude. O.V. Vijayan was writing Khasak and Itihasam. And they are both magical realist novels which were inventing a new technique of storytelling in parallel, one in Malayalam, one in Spanish, writing at the same time. One became world famous, won a Nobel Prize. The other one is not known very much to non-Malayalis, but that's the sad truth of our lives. So he was a friend of my father's. In fact, they were contemporaries in Palakkad. And then M.T. Vasudevan Nair became a friend. He used to visit us whenever he came to Bombay, later Calcutta, later Delhi. So whenever he traveled, and my father knew him through the newspaper, but my father was in the Statesman. He was for a long time the editor of the Madhrubhumi's weekly. So the two of them got to know each other very well, and he was frequently visiting us at home. And so through both those connections, there was a lot of sort of literature around the house and conversation around the house. Growing up in Mumbai and Calcutta, one of my regrets was that my parents didn't make me literate in Malayalam. So I read Malayalam fiction but in English translation.
Oh, that's a revelation.
Yeah, I know that's a big failing. But nonetheless, it's great literature.
You've written extensively about India's identity. How do you see South Indian culture contributing to this larger narrative?
First of all, Indian culture's diversity is something you've got to take for granted. Everything about Indian culture is diverse. And I tend to speak of Indian culture rather than either South or North or East or West because we're all one, essentially. There is a civilization integrity to our culture. But having said that, one thing about South Indian culture, which I think perhaps North Indians need to appreciate, is that our history was a bit different. And so some of the, I put it very bluntly, some of the complexes that history has imposed upon the North are wholly absent in the South. I'll give you one example. Kerala has been home to every conceivable kind of traveler and migrant. In fact, we have the richest genetic pool probably in the world because everybody has been to Kerala and mixed in our soil. We've had 3,000 years of trade across the relatively tranquil waters of the Arabian Sea. So Arabs came, I mean, before they called themselves Arabs and certainly before they were Muslim. There are excavations now in the site of Pattanam, which has discovered a Chinese porcelain going back to centuries before Christ, and Roman amphorae carrying Roman wine going back to the days of the Roman Empire, 400, 500 BC. It's just amazing the kind of connections that have been there. And these folks would come, trade, some would stay, marry, quote unquote, mix into our gene pool, as it were. Some would travel back when the winds changed. And all of this commerce was there. So as a result, we've had the oldest Jewish diaspora in the world outside Palestine. Because when the Jews fled the destruction of their first temple by the Babylonians, they came to Kerala. When they fled the destruction of the second temple by the Romans, they again came to Kerala. I mean, some of them. So they were welcomed very peacefully, allowed to live in peace, practice their faith, do what they like. The Jews will tell you it is the only example in the entire history of the Jewish people around the world of a Jewish diaspora that never knew a single episode of anti-Semitism. They were just welcome. Similarly, the Christians, St. Thomas, doubting Thomas the Apostle in the Bible, lands up. The story is when he lands on shore in Kerala, he's welcomed by a flute-playing Jewish girl. But anyway, then he starts converting people to his new faith. Then, of course, poor chap ends up in Tamil Nadu where he's killed for his pains, but that's another matter. In Kerala, he was okay, but the fact is that he did. And so there are people in Kerala whose families have been Christian since before any white person ever discovered Christianity. And it's something that the whites don't understand, and perhaps the North Indians don't understand. People in North India think of Christianity as having come from elsewhere. For us, it's been around in our midst for over 2,000 years. Similarly, Islam did not come by the sword in Kerala. Islam came as news from the same guys who've been coming for centuries back and forth across the Arabian Sea, the merchants and traders. They would come and spend 6 months in Kerala, go back to Arabia, come back again. And they said, hey, you know what's happening in our part of the world? There's this prophet and this is what he's preaching. And one of our kings, a chap called Cheraman Perumal, said, wow, this sounds interesting. I want to meet this guy. And so he hops into a ship. In fact, there was a whole flotilla of 23 ships that sailed off towards Arabia in order to meet the prophet. Many of those ships got stranded halfway, Lakshadweep or Maldives or whatever, never made it. But he did. And the amazing proof of this can be found even today because in Oman, south of Salalah, the port of Salalah, there are Kerala coconut trees growing from seeds that he had taken and planted there on his journey. He never made it back. But so the whole attitude Islam in Kerala is, again, these are guys who came, they're part of us, we're part of them. People have gone back and forth. In fact, I read somewhere that genetically, it is impossible to distinguish the DNA of the people of Kerala from the people of Oman. Now, two different cultures, two different languages, they don't think of themselves as the same people, but genetically the DNA is the same because they've been mixing for 3,000 years. This is the kind of history that Kerala is heir to. So we don't have these comments. Nobody in Kerala has a minority complex. There is no Christian or Muslim going around feeling that there's somehow a minority and a Hindu is a majority. First of all, the numbers are very, very marginally different. 53% Hindu, 47% non-Hindu in Kerala. But apart from that, no one is made to feel that because their name sounds different or they worship differently or they eat differently, that they're somehow less equal or less entitled or less of a stakeholder. And that, I think, is Kerala's big contribution to India's culture.
Very true. And which books would you like to suggest to people to start to understand this part of the literary tradition in our country? Now, when we talk about the Malayali authors.
Absolutely. I mean, I don't know where to stop because I have a lot of favorites. I mentioned 5, and all these are also available in English translation. I already mentioned O.V. Vijayan's Kasakendi Itihasam, which I think is definitely a must. The invention of magical realism in Indian fiction. Of M.T. Vasudevan, probably the one I would recommend would be Randamuzham, which is Second Turn, which is his reimagining of the Mahabharata from the point of view of Bhim. It was, as a second child, his was the second turn with Draupadi. And so the whole position, somebody who's overshadowed by his illustrious elder brothers, his more successful younger brother, whatever. He's just this big, muscular hunk, right? But imagine the story from his point of view. It's a fascinating novel. Then I would definitely recommend a classic that some of you may also know as a movie, Chemmin, which actually simply means prawns or shrimps. But basically, it's about a fishing village, a love story, tragic, beautiful depiction of culture and so on. The translation that I read is a pretty awful translation. I hope the newer translations have come out. But I read in the early 60s. The book is 1956 or so. Then there is a very clever, witty writer called Vaikam Muhammad Bashir. And a couple of his, he's written very many novels, short stories. He was quite prolific, unlike some of these other writers. I think Vijayan only had 5 novels. M.T. has maybe 6 or 7. They're not very prolific, but Bashir had 25 or so. But 2 I'd mention. One is definitely the English translation is called My Granddad Had an Elephant. And and this novel is really quite funny, written a kind of racy colloquial style, very, very enjoyable. So that's another one that I would recommend. Among the more recent writers, Definitely Benjamin. I would recommend Goat Days, Aadujeevitham, which has also become an award-winning film. In fact, there was a lot of outrage in Kerala when the lead star didn't win the Best Actor National Award for that.
Phenomenal movie.
He's very, very good. Prithviraj Sukumar, who's also from my constituency.
Subtle flex. I like it.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
The list is long. I'd like you to take a seat, sir.
No,
Everybody
it's
can
okay.
see you now.
People can see now? All right.
Yeah.
No, I think those are the ones. There's also K.R. Meera, who's written a very interesting book about the hangman. All these, one of the things worth saying is that the translations have become very much better. Translations in my childhood were very clunky, and you could feel you were reading a translation. The frustration of that can often be there. Today, they're very much better, and some of them have really been winning awards, and as you know, even for translations, including Benjamin's books and so on. So I would recommend all of these. I'm sure there are very many more, and I probably would be blamed for having omitted somebody whom I actually enjoyed, because there's so many names to mention.
We'll check your Insta and Twitter, sir. You tag us on Red FM India, we'll check. But you just spoke about how, you read...
Sorry, I've got to mention a friend of mine, actually.
Oh, okay.
M. Mukundan. He was actually in Delhi for the longest time working at the French embassy. He has a lovely novel called On the Banks of the Mayoy. Mayoy is a river in the French colonial possession of Mahe. And it's a terrific novel, and almost now I think being seen as a classic. He's also written a book about the Malayali diaspora in Delhi, which I would recommend to you as well, which I've reviewed and talked about in some of my writings. So anyway, I mean, the book is simply called Delhi, but I mean in English anyway. But the stories are great, and there's just so much out there, so much high quality material. So in literature and in cinema, Kerala sort of, does better per capita than any other state.
We have numbers to prove that. So you mentioned a book about elephants. It's also World Elephant Day today.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. My CEO shared the
order
post
some
line.
copies of that from Oxford, yeah.
Yeah, you should. So you mentioned you read translated, versions of the books growing up. So now you weave a lot of Indian idioms and phrases, along with the English language in your proses when you write, when you speak, which is very fascinating. So when it comes to Malayali, Malayalam, sorry, apologies. Mat karna troll. Does it serve more as a memory bank, or do you literally think when you write in Malayalam?
No, I don't think in Malayalam simply because one tends to think in the language in which one has been principally educated, and for me that was English. But I do think in Malayalam, and I'm speaking in Malayalam, and when I'm, I've won 4 elections in Kerala. You can't do that without making a dozen speeches a day or more in Malayalam. I think my record was one day I had 17 events. And these things are just part of a politician's life, but they're also something which has made me sort of, very comfortable with the language in ways that I wasn't when I came back after 29 years of the United Nations, where I very rarely had the opportunity to hear or speak Malayalam. And so it was a kind of relearning in some ways, but it was for me very, very worthwhile. It's a reconnection also to my roots.
So do you get writer's block, or do you get politician's block?
You'll have to define both for me. I think Salman Rushdie was very, very brilliant on writer's block. He said, what is this writer's block? It's such a complete indulgence. I mean, plumbers are not allowed to have plumber's block, or carpenters can't say, Sunday I got a block today, I can't make you. Yeah, everyone has to do their work. Writing is a profession, it's a job. You write because you have something to say. You write as well as you can. What you can do is you can write badly one day, and the next day you read it and say, hell, why did I write the scrap, and tear it up and delete it and start all over again? That can happen. But to not be just stare at a screen or a page and not be able to find any words, that I think is honestly, there's a psychological issue there, or there is a laziness is the real answer. I'm not a believer in writer's block. What is politician's block? There are always politicians trying to block you. Is that what you mean? No, that happens to me a lot, don't worry.
You're going on the run, no? Where you stop and you come back and you start writing, so your political engagements stop you from writing your...
No, that happens. Yep. In fact, I'm trying to put the finishing touches, the first draft of my next book, and your session has completely screwed that up. I've got to go back tonight and sleep later because of you.
You should be inspired and motivated. You've got people waiting.
I know, exactly. Potential readers. I'm looking forward to that.
You've addressed global audiences on diverse issues, sir. And now that you're now part of the community and a politician fighting elections from your own constituency, Do you have a Malayalam proverb or an idiom that you keep going back to? I'm just curious because in our households we grow up with certain phrases or idioms our
That's
elders
right.
say.
So there's one in particular that I've used an embarrassingly frequent number of times in my speeches because I like it. My father was very fond of it. It's a line from the great poet Mahakavi Vallatol. And the line is, Bharadam and the Ketalo, Abhimana Puridamavanam Andarangam. Kerala and the Ketale, Tilakyanam Chora Namukanyarambakalil. Which means when I hear the name of Bharat, my heart must swell with pride. But when I hear the name of Kerala, the blood must throb in my veins. So that is in many ways so typical of Kerala because Keralites are fiercely proud of being Keralites and of everything they've gained from the soil and culture of Kerala. And at the same time, they're very proud of India. They associate with India. They feel that India is the larger stage on which they can act out their own visions and fantasies. So it's a very nationalist at the same time, very anchored, very rooted
So we have
nationalist.
someone who embodies that with our CEO sitting here. Nisha Narayanan ma'am, the brainchild for Southside Story. I think that's the reason why we're doing this bookmarked literature segment, especially this edition of Southside Story. Thank you so much for adding more stars to this. Now, talking about the South Indian literature, it has received the recognition it deserves, according to you, on a national platform. Do you really believe it's got that due credit?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, I don't really... I don't have a chip on my shoulder about this, but by and large, when people think of Indian culture in Delhi, they are seeing it from a Delhi-centric point of view. It's Hindi-dominated, Punjabi perhaps, Bengali might come in, Marathi is already a bit far away, South Indian languages are almost semi-foreign. So for the mentality here, it is not really seen in that light. And I find that particularly, having studied, for example, history in North India, I was shocked to discover how little South Indian history is taught. We knew nothing about the Pallavas, the Cholas, the Cheras, and so on. And we knew about relatively minor kingdoms. I mean, the Cholas were a huge empire. And they were completely omitted from all my history classes in both Bombay and Calcutta. The Lodi Sultans were rather small little sultanates here in Delhi. And we all knew all the names of all the Lodi Sultans and so on. So there is something very North Indian-centric about what we study, what we learn. And I would really urge the North Indians to make an effort to read about the South. Just as the South Indians should make an effort to know more about the North, because it's part of creating a unified Indian imagination, which I think is so necessary for our country.
We're doing a bit with Southside Story.
Yeah,
exactly
great.
why we're doing this.
Good for you.
So this is talking about on a national level, but when we talk about a global level, how do you think South Indian literature has really played a role in presenting India on a global platform?
Well, now, with translations, I don't think it matters whether you're South Indian or when a French publisher is publishing an Indian novel in translation, I don't think they care whether it's translated from Hindi or Bengali or Malayalam or Tamil. It's whether the story resonates, whether the publisher she thinks that the French readers will relate to it, etc. I remember when I was first published in French, I remember saying to my publishers at the time, and this was back in 1990, 1991, I said, why is it that the only books you have from Indian writers are from English when there is such good writing taking place in other languages? And her answer was, well, the problem is getting good enough translations. Now, that's less of a problem today because, again, the Indian diaspora is everywhere. And now you can get people in France who are, Bengali mother tongue and can write French and so on and so forth. And that's happening with other Indian languages as well. So now I think you're getting better translations into other languages. I don't really think that South or North matters in the global audience. In India, I think there's still been a bit of a barrier, but now thanks to the improved quality of translations, even that barrier is being overcome. So if you go to North Indian publishers who are publishing books in translation, I think you'll find as many South Indian books as North Indian. I don't think that's an issue.
So, talking about your mother tongue, you said coming back it was sort of relearning the words in the language after 29 years of being abroad. How has your relationship changed in the recent decades with your own mother tongue now?
Oh, it's changed enormously because, frankly, I mean, every day is a learning day for me because every time I'm listening to a speech in Malayalam, I'm picking up new expressions, new words. Because, not having grown up in Kerala, not having gone to school or college in Kerala, when you learn a language, So I picked up Malayalam as a kid from these annual holidays to the home villages. So it was a heard and spoken language. It wasn't a literary or read language, and therefore it became very colloquial, very informal. Sometimes I was unaware that expressions I was using in Palakkad would sound odd in Trivandrum, for example, which I found out only when I came and sought votes in Trivandrum, or that certain kinds of things we were routinely used to saying at home were not said in polite company or on a formal stage. You know, those are the kinds of things you have to learn by making those mistakes. And I've made all those mistakes, but people fortunately seem to have found it endearing. I'm not mocked for my Malayalam, which I have every right. I mean, they have every right to mock me if they want to. But no, they seem to find it rather charming. Oh, we want to listen to Shashi speaking in Malayalam.
Some anecdotes, some faux pas that happened, if you
Pardon?
remember. Some faux pas you can.
I'm not going to give you my faux pas. There's enough out there on the internet.
But one from you, if there's an anecdote.
No, I mean, I can tell you one in the private conversation, not on the stage. You see, I mentioned that my sister had a cough. Now, in Palakkad, the word we use for coughing in Trivandrum is only used for dogs barking. So they said, oh, you're talking about your dog? You have a dog? I said, no, it's my sister. She said, why is she barking? So I said, no, she's coughing. Oh, I see, okay. So then you use the wrong word. Now, there's a simple example that even in a small, narrow state like Kerala, you know, the dialects change. It is often said, the same thing is true of Hindi, that the dialects change every 30 kilometers. And the same is true in Kerala. Even the way the Malayalam language is spoken, there are some parts of Kerala where it's so musical practically, though, you know, you feel they're singing rather than talking to you. And in other parts, it's relatively smooth and rough. Then there's a very heavy infusion of Sanskrit in Kerala. So the more formal a speech is, the Sahitya Malayalam is overwhelmingly Sanskritized. Whereas common or garden sort of colloquial Malayalam is not. You have something similar between Hindustani and the old Akashvani Hindi. If any of you are young enough to remember listening to the news in Akashvani Hindi, even a native Hindi speaker needed a dictionary to figure out what was going on in the world.
True that. So, growing up, when you were reading the translations in English of the Malayalam authors, which author probably left a mark upon you, a strong one?
Well, I mean, I can't help the fact that because we personally knew Vijayan and MT, and I later personally knew Mukundan, that I have a special soft corner for them because I can see them, I can imagine them as they're writing, sort of thing. So those are the ones. The others for me are great names. Takaji Shivashankara Pillai, Vaikom Muhammad Bashir. These are giants of Kerala literature, but I never met them, never knew them. They are only names on a printed page to me. So in that sense, they relate better. But I mean, I will say that for me, I have read so widely and so eclectically from so many backgrounds, so many languages, so many cultures, and so many countries that I can't honestly tell you that I've got one particular strong influence on my writing. My writing actually betrays various kinds of influences and weaknesses. So in my fiction, for example, you will find that I have a fondness for humor, even where a situation may not warrant it. So the great Indian novel is a satirical novel, so that many things are tongue-in-cheek and throw them in. But that comes from growing up having really enjoyed reading P.G. Wodehouse and lesser humorists. And for me, that became an indispensable part of how I was relating to the world, was humor, right? Or a weakness for alliteration or whatever. These are individual characteristics. I can no longer tell you where some things have come from, which writers they've come from. I know that I've not tried to write magical realism. So even though I fabulously love both Garcia Marquez and O.V. Vijayan, I haven't tried to write magical realism because that's simply not the way I conceive of the world. I find the real world is interesting enough and funny enough if I want to poke fun at it, or dramatic enough if I want to tell a story of it.
So, how do you balance your deeply political engagement with the quiet, introspective, literary world? You know, the whole.
It's the only way I stay sane, my dear. I mean, there is nothing. I'm never at peace except when I'm sitting in a closed room with it's just a computer and me on a keyboard. That's honestly the moment when my mind is focused, is relaxed, is clear, is in a different space. Because especially politics, but that was also true of my later career at the UN, the intrusions are multiple, unpredictable, come at all times in all directions, and it becomes very, very difficult for your mind ever to be at rest. I mean, you can be dealing with one crisis when another crisis arises. You can be, whereas the world of writing there is this opportunity for quiet contemplation of you, your ideas, and the page, and that to me is indispensable for my sanity. I mean, I've often said this that I'm already a former minister. One day I'll be a former MP, but I hope never to be a former writer, because that's when I truly find myself.
We'll never let that happen, sir. So I've been fortunate enough to be introduced to the South Indian delicacies. More than what I know, being in Delhi, being a North Delhiite, which is only idli, dosa, sambar, rasam. But because of Red FM South Side Stories conceptualization and tradition, which came into my life 7 years ago, I would ask you to share your favorite meal growing up in a Malayali household.
Well, I mean, they're sort of household favorites. If you want a formal meal, it's often the Ona Sadhya, because that's when you get a whole range of I'm vegetarian, by the way, which is very unusual in Kerala. I think I'm one of 3% of the Kerala population. Everyone else looks at me as if I'm some sort of weird creature because I say, sorry, no meat, no fish, whatever. But the fact is that my mother thinks she took me to a butcher shop when I was all of 4 or 5 years old, and I was revolted by what I saw, and I just refused to sink my teeth into a corpse after that. I have no objection to all of you having your corpses in front of me. Don't worry. I mean, it's to each his own. No decision is more personal than what you put into your mouth. So, up to you, everybody. But I leave it to you. But anyway, for me that was an issue. But anyway, so Ona Sadhya is vegetarian usually. Though in some parts of Kerala, even that tradition is gone. They'll have meat and fish and chicken as well. But anyway, the traditional Ona Sadhya is great. If you want specific dishes from my home, there were 2 or 3 I particularly mentioned, which there was an urlakayang upperi. Now, this is a Palakkad phrase. Okay. Urlakayang is potatoes. Upperi means something else in other parts of Kerala, but in my family and in Palakkad, it was a fabulous dish. My father even taught me how to make it because he was a great chef himself. But in the household kitchen, which was usually occupied by a domestic helper, first boil the potatoes, peel them, boil them in water with haldi, right, and salt. Then dice them, and then you toss them, saute them in a mixture that you've done in the mixie already of just red chilies and small onions, the shallots, the tiny ones. And again, with salt to taste. Some people, if they dare it, can also put a little bit of tamarind. My mouth is watering as I think about this. Then you toss it and saute it, and of course, if you like, you can roast it so much that it turns black, as some people like to do. It is the most delicious dish imaginable. You can have it with rice, you can have it with roti, puri, whatever you want. It's a fabulous thing. That's one dish. Another thing we do rather well in our household is a thing called malagushim, which is a kind of dal with spinach in it. And it's fabulous. I find it so much more interesting than just having a regular yellow dal is having a malagushim.
कर लिया नोट सबने? रेसिपी सर इंस्टाग्राम के कैप्शंस में डाल देंगे.
Then of course sambar, rasam. I'm an idli fanatic.
Ooh,
I eat idlis every day of my life if I can possibly manage it. Except when I'm abroad, of course. That's not so easy.
Personal question, do you like the Delhi sambar, what we've done to the sambar here in Delhi?
Look, you guys have to understand that sambar was invented in the south because of the north. Are you aware of this? When the Marathas conquered Tanjavur in Tamil Nadu, they parked Sambhaji as the Maharaja there, and he was missing his dal. Now, we didn't have any of his dal stuff in South India. So the cooks tried to approximate something for him that they thought might please his palate, and they named it for him. Sambar was named for Sambhaji, the Maratha Peshwa of Tanjavur. And that's how it came about. So whatever you guys do to sambar can't be worse than what we did to your dal.
Oh God. I think we'll put this to close, sir, but while doing the closing note, there's a question which we all at Red FM, wanted to ask you. For us, Red FM Southside Story in its 7th edition is not just an effort to bring the south of India to Delhi through music, food, culture, and now in this latest edition with literature, but we define it as a celebration of culture connecting India in the most wholesome way. And I would request you, Dr. Tharoor, to define Southside Story in your own words, or as the internet has called it, the Tharoorian way.
Oh my God, I don't know about Tharoorian way, but from what I understand of it, and I'm looking forward to seeing it in action, I guess at the end of the month, right? It seems to me that it's culture in conversation, cultures in conversation because the people of the North coming to enjoy the culture of the South. It's heritage in dialogue with cuisine. It is at the same time a melding, a bridge building between different artistic experiences, cinema, film, books, conversations, along with an audience for whom this may be unfamiliar. So it's also an exercise in building bridges across. And I think all of this is so important because the great thing about it being Indian is the richness of our diversity. And it'll be such a shame and such a pity if every Indian doesn't seize the opportunity to discover a totally unfamiliar part or even a partly unfamiliar part of India, because there's so much more we can learn and offer from it. I feel so lucky that I've grown up in so many parts of India. I have friends and classmates in every major city, and I feel at home anywhere in India. Even then, for example, it's only in relatively recent years that I've discovered the Northeast, and it's fabulous. But I didn't really know it. I mean, there's just so much to discover in our country. So by all means, if you can't get away from Delhi, come to Southside Story and discover the South.
So, on behalf of Red FM, Dr. Tharoor, Southside Story-il Tirchayayam Varnam. Did I get that right?
Tircha item vera.
Done.
Well done.
30th and 31st August, sir.
She said, you must definitely come. So I said, yes, I'll come.
Translation subtitles.
The only problem is I probably won't be in Delhi, so I may have to take a rain check on that one for the next one.
So Instagram, we're very active on social media. We'll share it with you. But I have to ask you, sir, since there's music also for 2 days, there are lots of bands. We've got Avil, we've got Thaikadam Bridge, T.M. Krishnam. Who are your favorite people? Krishnan.
I actually have heard all of them and they're really terrific. But I don't want to play favorites because I know half these guys. They often perform on occasions where I'm present. I don't want anyone to say, you named them, you didn't name me. They're all good. They really are. There's tremendous talent. There's some very, very gifted musicians coming out of Kerala. By all means, all of the ones you mentioned are worth listening to.
So thank you so much. Now we are going to open the floor for the Q&A, post which we will go into the book signing.
Hello, sir. It's a great pleasure to meet you again.
Thank you.
Sir, I had a question for you as a writer. You as a writer have been shaped by both the intimate, culturally rich codes of your Malayali heritage and also by the vast cosmopolitan experiences that you have had as a professional. Have there been any moments where in your writing life where these two sensibilities have come into a conflict and have wrestled for primacy in your narratives? And if so, how had you then sort of navigated through that?
The conflicts are there all the time. For example, I first was publishing when I was at the United Nations. And I must have been the only author in the world to actually have to have a disclaimer on the copyright page of his book saying, though the author is an official of the United Nations, none of the opinions expressed by the characters in this book should be considered to be those of the author in his official capacity. I kid you not. That was there because, I mean, if one of my characters said something that was considered inappropriate for a UN official to say, I couldn't be in trouble, so I had to have that disclaimer. So in other words, I had to watch. And again, there was a rule of the UN that you can't offend a member state. And so I wrote essentially about my own country, feeling in a democracy I was free to offend my own my own government, which is the member state of the United Nations. Thank God nobody from the Indian government complained. But once I wrote an article on the 50th anniversary of India's independence in the New York Times, and the Pakistani ambassador complained that by celebrating the diversity of India, all the religions and so on, that I was insulting the aspirations of the Muslim people to have their own country, which I had certainly not done. So my Secretary General called me with a smile and said, I've got this letter and I'm filing it vertically. And he put it into the waste paper basket in front of me. So there are these clashes. Politics, of course, does come in the sense that some of the things I write may not make some people happy who have different political views. And that's something, because I'm in active politics, I can't help being a lightning rod for those who have different opinions. It may be a mark of my integrity that I managed to offend almost everybody at some time or the other.
We'll come to the back benches, don't worry.
Hello, sir.
Hi.
Your books was one of the first books I ever read, and thank you so much for writing them. An
Thank
Era
you.
of Darkness, that is.
Thank you.
My question would be that as a first year student at college, I am often conflicted about pursuing a career in the civil services or pursuing an MBA. I understand it that you were a civil servant and that was what led you to a career at UN. What would your advice to me be in that regard?
Actually, I've written about my choices at the time. I wasn't a civil servant. My ambition had been to join the Indian Foreign Service if I could, because I had this very convenient habit of doing well at examinations. It's not something anyone needs to be particularly proud of. It doesn't show you to be a genius. It just shows you're good at short-term memory recall and how to write very fast. And in India, that was enough. I kept coming first in everything. So I was pretty confident I'd crack the services. But as I wrote in my book, India from Midnight to the Millennium, and in many articles around that time, my choice, the time that I was eligible to write the exam was when the emergency was on. And it was a deeply disillusioning time for anybody who had contemplated working for the government. Because I was in graduate school in America, I saw a lot of things of how the government servants, the diplomats in the embassy and so on were behaving. And I just said, I can't do this for a living. I'm just not prepared to sell my soul like this. So, in a sense, I chose to do a PhD as a way of postponing a decision. And then I stumbled into a career at the United Nations entirely by accident. My first contract was a 1-month contract. That then became a 1-year contract. Finally, a 3-year contract, then a 5-year contract. The next thing I knew, I was there for 29 years. So that simply evolved by accident. But I didn't go to the Indian Civil Service. I was an international civil servant. I was a UN official. But in that sense, I hadn't done it. But after a while, I realized that perhaps I had been a little too dramatic in my rejection. Because when you serve your country, you have to serve it, warts and all, ups and downs included, and governments will come and change, and they did. Many, many times. And the Indian people will always decide who they want to rule them. So to my mind, in the end, that was probably not... But when you take decisions in life, you can look back upon them later and say, well, this is what shaped my life. And so that's what it shaped me. For you, I would say you have to really ask yourself the question, what would I be happy waking up in the morning and doing? My parents wanted me also, because I was good at taking exams, to get into the IIMs, do an MBA and make lots of money for some multinational corporation. Money never motivated me, but to make them happy, I took the exams to the 2 IIMs in the country, Ahmedabad and Calcutta in those days, and I came first in one and second in the other. And I turned them both down to go off and study international relations in America. So, which I could only do because I got a full scholarship there, because my parents would not have been able to afford to send me. So when I look at all of this, I say to myself, I made some choices. I was lucky enough to have parents who backed me. They never tried to force me to live out their dreams. My father always understood that I had to lead my own life and I had to be happy in the morning. And that's what you need to ask yourself. What will make me happier? Is money a motivation for you? In which case an MBA will get you more money than taking the civil service exams, because I want you to be an honest civil servant. The only way civil servants make money is by doing dishonest things. So don't ever be that kind of person. Go off and make money in business instead. So there you can do it legally. Okay. But otherwise, if you feel that money is not your big motivation, you want the satisfaction of taking decisions that affect lots of people's lives, you want to be able to, move governments and processes and implement policies and transform things. Government offers such marvelous possibilities in all of that. And I have met a lot of fine civil servants and diplomats who have really made a difference to the future of India and the shape of the country we're in today through their work. I just released a book a couple of days ago to which I wrote the foreword about Dr. M.S. Swaminathan, the man who brought the Green Revolution to India. The things you can do through government, you can never do through any business. So please remember that it's a lot. Don't think of government work as only babus pushing files. It's actually, it can be transformational. And I encourage you to consider that seriously. But the final decision you make has to be based on what will I be happy doing every day for the rest of my life. And you know best what makes you tick.
We'll go to the gentleman in the back.
Sir, recently there is a wider understanding of South India by the North. thanks to organizations or platforms like Southside Story. But moreover, in the past, there was the people from the south, Kerala, Telangana, Andhra, Tamil Nadu were grossly termed as Madrasis. Why it was so? What was the thing? And moreover, I am also from South India, Kerala too, Palakkad district.
From my district as well. Yeah, I know. I grew up in the India when people still called us all Madrasis. I don't think they do that anymore, do they? Really? But, there was a time, frankly, when, I remember I had an uncle who went and studied in an agricultural college in Ratnagiri district of Maharashtra. And people really asked him questions, literally as if Kerala was a foreign country. As if, people were, somehow everything must be different there. And it was a realization of how much ignorance there was, how little people knew of what was going on in different parts of the country. Today, I think there's much more familiarity, but certainly this North-centric view that I spoke about, when it came to everything from history studies to literature, the fact is that that was always there. And there was this entire sort of perception that anything south of Bombay was Madrasis. And that was the way in which they were all considered. So I think India's got better now. We're more aware of each other. Even Bollywood is now depicting the South in sympathy, with some sympathy, and Chennai Express and South Indian heroes and North Indian films. And so things are changing in many ways. So that expression, I think, is really now for an earlier generation. And when we all pass on, I think you lot will never be using words like Madrasi.
Cancel culture is on. Cancel ho jaoge varna. Sir, you have a question? Do you need a mic? There.
I have a apolitical question because you asked not to ask political questions.
बहुत शुक्रिया, sir.
How do you see idea of India evolving right now?
Look, for me, the idea of India has been very consistent across, what is it now, 44 years of published books. So I can stick to one idea through 44 years. I think you can be sure I'll stick to it throughout. Which is, I see India as a unified civilization, which goes back to ancient times, but with a great number of influences from different parts of the world, different ethnicities, different religions, different languages, different histories, all coming in, colliding, merging, and creating a new story. And to my mind, while we can be proud of our civilizational roots, which go right back to the ancient days, the Vedas and the Puranas and the epics and all of that, we cannot deny or ignore the validity of all these other influences. Even the shirt you're wearing, my friend, didn't exist in India before the British came and brought it, right? Or the kurta I'm wearing didn't exist before the Muslims came to North India and taught us how to make kurtas. So you're seeing a society and a civilization that has evolved over centuries, indeed over millennia. And how can you be in denial of any of these different influences? So for me, the idea of India is therefore of a composite culture, of an ancient civilization, but one which has definitely got enriched by a whole lot of diversity and other influences. For me, I look with pleasure and wonder when I see somebody from the Northeast who may look different, sound different, eat different, dress different, but is as much a part of my India as somebody from Kashmir, somebody from Gujarat. In fact, the mother of my children, my first wife, is, I beg your pardon, half Kashmiri, half Bengali, which itself is an unusual combination. But that took care of the north and the east. So we said we must name our firstborn Ishan because Ishan is the northeastern quadrant of the sky. It's also Ishan, which is the first name for Shiv in the Rig Veda. And then we had a second child and we gave him a name, as it happens, from the northwest, Kanishk. But to cut a long story short, I joked that this boy Ishan, with north, east and south in his blood, all he has to do is marry a Gujarati and he'll cover all four corners of the country. And believe it or not, he actually did that. So we now have a granddaughter who represents all four corners of the peninsula of India, and her name is Kahani. So there is a Kahani there. No?
Last question. Sir, you choose now.
I don't want to make... I'm a politician. I want to make everyone happy. You pick one.
So we got the boy from Palakkad. Now other people.
How about the young lady here then?
All right.
Just to make sure we have gender balance, since we've had 3 men and only 1 girl.
Yeah, good evening, sir.
Yeah, hi.
My question is that we talked a lot about of your Malayalam culture and the
Fear.
Kerala thing.
Fear of Malayalam culture, you said?
Nee, we talked a lot about our
Your
your
Malayalam
Malayalam
culture.
culture
Yeah.
and the Kerala thing. Now, I would like to ask your opinion about my home state, that is Uttar Pradesh. Three
Oh.
good things and three bad things.
3 best things in Uttar Pradesh.
Yeah.
Oh boy. I mean, obviously the Sangam is one great thing about Uttar Pradesh, right? I would have thought that the Ganga Jamni Tehzeeb is another good thing about Uttar Pradesh. That the fact that you've got this extraordinary culture which has its own vocabulary, its own style, its own politeness, its own everything else, right? And then I'm embarrassed to admit I'm probably the only Hindu in this country who has never been to Banaras. One day I will go,
Oh my
but I
God,
believe
sir.
कि बुलावा होना चाहिए, तो एक दिन जाऊंगा. Even my parents have been, everyone has been, my family except me. I just haven't had an excuse to go. Every time I've been invited to give a talk at BHU or something else happens, it gets cancelled. So as a result, I've never been. But the third would have to be Banaras simply because of its extraordinary history and the fact that Kashi is in every part of India, even in villages in Kerala, from people who've never even taken a train out of their village. Kashi means something. So those would be the 3 things I would mention.
Ever been to Lucknow?
That's why I mentioned the Ganga Jamuna Tehzeeb. Of course I've been to Lucknow, a beautiful place.
Please
Thank
come
you.
once.
Yes, lovely place, great culture and very, very polite people. Pehle aap.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.